Great. I make that 2 minutes past. I've pressed record, James, so over
Right.
to you. Thank you.
Many thanks, Victoria. So, welcome to this this session. As it says on the slide, my name's James Bentham. I'm a statistician, and I'm in the math school at the University of Kent. What I'm hoping to do is to show you that despite being perhaps in what is quite often a dry area, the work we do is in fact relevant, highly relevant to health. And in particular, what I'm going to talk about is how we maximise the impact of population health data. And by maximising impact, I mean both scientifically, but also maximising the impact on the wider world through both academic routes and also ways of maximising impact, such as using the media. So let me move on. So just very briefly on what my background is and how I got to the point where I was working with this population health data. So I started with, well, following an undergraduate degree and some work, I took an MSc in stats and then did a PhD in statistics. So that could be very dry, but in my case, I did something that I found very interesting, which was to take data from the National Reporting and Learning System. So this was between 2006 and 2010. So this system contained data of various types, but I was working with free text data. So the doctor or nurse or whoever it was reporting the incident would write their description. It would be either directly uploaded or transcribed to the national database. And then that text data was sitting there, millions of text descriptions, without really being analysed in full. Just too many text descriptions to look at manually. So there are all these descriptions. Lots of them were just patient fell, patient fall, and so on. Lots of different medication errors, and then occasionally something more rare, perhaps more interesting than these. And my PhD was about using, well, not ChatGPT style methods, because they didn't exist, but the precursors to those, to find groups of incident types, small groups of incidents that were previously unknown. So that was really my first first piece of research on health data. So I did that, looked around for a postdoc, and ended up doing a genetic study. So I moved across London to Guy's, became a postdoc, and did a lot of the analysis on a genome-wide association study of lupus. So everything from getting the data from the genotyping lab right the way through to publishing the paper that you can see there. So again, very interesting way of using statistics skills on something that isn't theoretical, that hopefully does actually have some genuine impact. But then I finished that and needed another job, so I applied for other postdoc positions and ended up back at Imperial, and ended up on the project that I've been working on now as part of this for 10 years, and ended up working on modelling of non-communicable diseases. So as I'm sure you all know, NCDs one of the main global causes of death. So I did statistical modelling for this project. I'm not going to talk about the modelling at all today. I'm going to talk about the broader project and how if you've got population health data, how you might perhaps be able to get involved with the large collaborations that are analysing these data sets. So back as a postdoc, and what we were doing was modelling data on the risk factors for NCDs, so key risk factors. So BMI, overweight and obesity, but also underweight, which is still prevalent in lots of places in the world. Diabetes prevalence, various measures of blood pressure, and cholesterol, which I've just put the word cholesterol there because I wasn't involved. So with that part, so I don't really know anything about that bit. And the real point of this was that up until, well, really about 2010, there really weren't many estimates of trends in those risk factors available at national level. So if you wanted to know how, let's say, obesity prevalence had progressed in Japan or India or China, UK, US, in those cases, data were available, but not necessarily in using comparable metrics. So you'd have data on hypertension, or you'd have data on raised blood pressure, or you might have data on BMI, but using cutoffs that aren't the standard WHO cutoffs for overweight and obesity. So there was some data for those countries, and then for much of the world, there really was very sparse data. So the point of this project was to take that data, put it together in a comparable way, and then do statistical modelling to be able to produce comparable estimates of, let's say, underweight trends by country from 1975 to, at that point, 2015 or so. So there was this gap, and now there are two large groups filling this gap. So one of them is, so if you go to healthdata.org, that's IHME, which is based in Seattle, I think it is, so associated with University of Washington. So that is one of the major groups. And then the other key group globally was this group I ended up working with at Imperial. So this is the NCD risk factor collaboration, which is abbreviated to NCD risk here. So what we've got is, if you go to ncdrisk.org, you'll see all of our information and our estimates and our publications. So you can, if you're interested, look at visualizations of our data. You can look at particular country profiles, but we also make our estimates publicly available. This is really to maximize the scientific impact of the work. We want as many people as possible to be able to use these estimates. And then you've also got publications, and if you're really interested in the statistical modelling side, then there's also statistical code there. But as I said towards the start, what I'm really aiming for today is to give an idea of how a collaboration like this works, and how, if you've got some population health data, you might be able to become a member of either this collaboration or similar collaborations that are run by academics. So NCD risk factor collaboration In this case, this is led by academics. So my ex-boss at Imperial, he's a professor of global health. So he's not a physician. He's an academic, and he leads this. He's got a long-standing collaboration with WHO, which obviously is very helpful. That gives the collaboration access to all of their data sources, all of their contacts, and when the collaboration is contacting people with data, obviously this is a good selling point for joining this collaboration. But it's not just academics and WHO. The collaboration involves really anybody else who's willing to contribute data. So this might be governments, so it might be ministries of health, but we'll see some other government-based sources a little bit later. Then if doctors have collected data as part of a study, controlled study, then the collaboration is very happy to include that data. And then other academics, people who've been collecting data perhaps for many years in a particular country, who've now got extensive data on perhaps adiposity or blood pressure, more rarely because it's more expensive, diabetes and cholesterol. So we've ended up, it says, this is from the website, 200 countries is a slight, well, it's not untrue. We make estimates for 200 countries. We've got actual data sources for about 193 countries and territories around the world. So it's 200 countries, well, 200 countries or territories. So places like Hong Kong, for example, we make estimates there. We currently have about getting on towards 3,500 surveys that we have data from. And we've got data from about 200 million participants. A lot of this data is from South Korea because they measure pretty much all of their population during some of their surveys. So we've got a lot of data here, but we're trying to make estimates for these 200 countries and territories. We're trying to make estimates from 1975 onwards, splitting it by male and female, splitting it by age. So there is still, although we've got all this data, once you have all these different categories and combinations, then the data becomes quite sparse. So you do need to be careful with the statistical modelling for this project. So the way the collaboration works is, firstly, my ex-boss has access to all the data sets that are available via WHO. So demographic and health surveys, all sorts of other surveys that have been carried out around the world that WHO own and can give to our collaboration. But then there's a lot of painstaking work to collate the data. So this is an ongoing data collation project that's been going on now for at least 15 years. And really, if anybody has got measured data on BMI and other measures of adiposity, blood pressure, and so on, then the collaboration is interested in hearing from them. So a key way that we do this, key way that the team that does this works, is that they carry out a literature review. So to attract the attention of the collaboration, the data needs to be published in some way, either through academic papers or perhaps through reports from particular organisations. So if during the literature review that team sees that there's data available, they will then send out emails, perhaps also making phone calls anywhere in the world to try to get permission to use this data. So we've had data, for example, I think it's the Swiss and the Danish ministries of defence, or the equivalents, have provided with data from soldiers in the 19th century on weight and height. We've managed to get hold of data from people who were surveying obesity in Pacific Islands, isolated Pacific Islands, in the 1970s. So that's allowed us to show how long obesity has been a major issue in places like Nauru and Samoa and so on. We've had people finding printouts on their shelves in their offices and sending them to us. Somebody has to type them into Excel spreadsheets and so on. So I guess really the key point here is, if your data are available in some way online, then you may well end up being contacted by these collaborations. And then in other cases, people have contacted us, and so long as the data is measured, as long as we can see what the study design is, then that data can be included in the database and then contribute to our estimates. So the collaboration, if you happen to have data from countries with sparse data, then we're very interested. So anybody with data, let's say, particularly in certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa, data collection is quite limited. But we've got lots of data from UK, US, Japan, China, India, and so on. And if you've got that data, the collaboration would like to add it just to make the estimates that just a little bit more precise for all of these countries. So once the data's in, I'm not going to talk about this at all, really. There's what's called Bayesian modelling, named after Thomas Bayes, who's on the right there. This has been well known in statistics for, well, decades, but is now becoming quite fashionable outside academia. It's a way of modelling large data sets that come from different sources that have different degrees of sparsity. So you can put together data from different countries and years, age groups, and you can make estimates. So, as I say, this is becoming better known outside academia. It was a very academic subject because it requires computing power that is now standard for pretty much anybody. So it doesn't take outlandish computing power to fit these models now. And just to say, if you are interested in knowing more about this, your local statistics department or mathematics school or whoever, whichever university you've got locally, you would very likely be interested in talking to you about this and maybe giving some training if you're interested. So we've done some work with one of the local councils in Kent, where a particular person in that council has an interest in this type of modelling. We've given some training, they've recruited some of our ex-students to work on this. So that is a potential source of training for this type of data modelling. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm not going to talk about the modelling at all. We take our data that we've collated, model it, and then we can publish our estimates of obesity and blood pressure trends and so on. So the key outcome, and I guess this is one of the key ways in which we can make impact both scientifically, but also make impact in a way that helps everybody's careers and promotion applications and so on. Because it's such a large collaboration that's been going on for so long, and is run by well-known professor from global health, we can publish in really high impact journals. So we can write papers that do get a lot of attention. So these are some of the types of papers that we've had. So you can see that we've had multiple Lancet papers there, and also I think we've had 3 papers in Nature so far. So obviously this is very high impact work. But you might possibly be asking yourself, if you got involved in the collaboration, if you provided data, what would then happen to your data? So the way this works is that we make agreements with the people who provide the data, and for each paper that's published using a particular data source, we allow 2 authors per data source. So if you've carried out a study and it's used in these publications, you would be able to nominate 2 people, and they can then say that they're authors of these publications. So what we've got here is we've got the way in which this works. So on the left, we've got what we call the analysis and writing group. We're the people who actually do the data collation, do the statistical modelling, and write the papers and so on. So that's these people are a series of people who are sort of the inner group, a mixture of academics and physicians. And then on the right-hand side, we've got people who contributed data. So you can see that we start with the A's, start with Leandra Abarca Gomez. By the time we get down to this end of this second column, we've only got 2 surnames beginning with B. So the actual full author lists for these collaborations are enormous. I think it's something like 1,200 or so for some of these papers. So if you provide data, you do get to be an author. It's part of a very long list of people who have contributed. So all of these people can say on their CVs that they've got authorship of these papers. So that's the way it works in terms of scientific outputs. And then we also, in our papers in the appendix, buried in the appendix, we also describe the different data sources that we've used. So this is just a random screenshot of that. What you can see is we've got some data on German conscripts there, so that's quite an interesting data source. We've got all these demographic health surveys. STEPS is another international survey. But then we've got these papers here. So we've identified that these papers were available on, for example, this is clearly on blood pressure. got another one down here in Greece. So we've gone back and we've tried to find the authors here and invite them to be part of the collaboration. So that's a key way of bringing yourself to the attention of academics running these collaborations, as I said a bit earlier. So that's one of the key outcomes in terms of scientific impact. Those results then get cited by other academics. They get used in government reports. They get used to get used when civil servants are developing policies and so on. But a lot of this, particularly in terms of obesity, which is obviously a well-known health issue, it's easy to explain. There's very clear story in Western countries, at least. We get a lot of attention from the media on these stories. So you can see here, this is from some internationally, from some of our papers. You get a little bit less attention on diabetes and blood pressure, but still the health correspondents of major news organisations will pick this up, and there will be stories. So again, this is both impact in terms of scientific impact, outreach to the public, but obviously again, it's something people can put in on their CVs. Now, academics are often quite defensive about their media impact, because particularly if it's fairly marginal, they don't want other people getting credit for their credit in the media, at least, for their work. In this case, that doesn't happen, because this is a sufficiently big project. Imperial do the main press release for all these papers as the lead institution, but they're very happy for other contributors to write their own. So we've, for example, my university puts out press releases on these. WHO do their own, but contributors can emphasize their particular study. They can emphasize something that's of particular interest to them in from their study. We get people in other countries doing press releases for their own media, for example. So there's plenty of scope for impact of this type as well. So there's both the scientific impact, the media impact, and I guess the third strand is the potential policy impact. And then I guess the fourth strand might be whether this is actually having any effect in the real world. That's more difficult to measure. So hopefully this is having that sort of impact, but we're definitely able to demonstrate the previous types. So other impact of this work, if you go to the WHO fact sheet on obesity and overweight, all those numbers are from our collaboration. And then if you go to the what's it called, the Global Health Observatory, all of their estimates, the official WHO estimates, as you can see here, both sexes, male, female, different regions and global estimates, all of those estimates come from our collaboration. So again, if your data's being used for this this work, you can feel that it's having this impact, but also you can say, well, our data contributed to this study and is now being reported as WHO official statistics. So again, there's high impact there. And then also our data's been used in various reports. So global reports, the global report on diabetes, that used our numbers from our diabetes paper. We provided numbers for the Atlas of Childhood Obesity, and then we were in an ongoing cycle of providing estimates for various iterations of the Global Nutrition Report. So that's it. I was only intending to speak for about half an hour, and then I'm very happy to answer any questions that anybody's got on any of this.
Thanks, James. There's nothing in the chat just yet. People feel free to put your hands up, come off camera if you feel comfortable to do so, or pop them in the chat. For me, James, it's just really interesting to hear about such a wide-reaching. I hadn't appreciated the size of the collaboration, and that was really interesting, exciting to hear about. I think there was an offer there for then people within the group if they wanted to become a member. Of that kind of collaboration, and how would you go? How would you suggest they go about doing that? The best way to and who to approach?
What I'd say is if you can see that there's a collaboration in your particular area of interest where there are academics who are obviously publishing highly cited works on that, you can work out who the lead of those projects are, leads of those projects are, and just send them an email. So they are likely to either respond to you themselves or pass it on to their team. So everything, I would say in academia, everything's quite informal. So you can just get in touch with them. It tends to be on these papers, it tends to be the last author. There's a convention where the first author is the more junior person who's done most of the actual analysis or work, and then the last author is the key academic running the project.
Great, thank you. I don't want to hog the floor, but whilst people are just reflecting and having a think about their questions, it'd be really interesting, and I don't know whether we do this in a further session or you can point me in the right direction, to understand a little bit more about the data that's gathered together. How cross-sectional is it? How longitudinal is it? It'd just be really great to have, if there's more information you can point us to on that. Yeah,
so we would obviously like to have longitudinal data over long periods. It's just not available. So we treat, even if the data is longitudinal, which it is in some cases, we treat it as cross-sectional, and we're making estimates at national level of mean values of, say, BMI or mean obesity levels. So there, in particular countries, there are longitudinal data, but that's not how we can model. We can't model it because, for example, let's say I don't know, somewhere like I don't know, somewhere in Sub-Saharan Africa, say there's just not enough data. So it's cross-sectional, it's summary data, and then from that we make national estimates.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you. We've got two questions in the chat. Is there a particular area of interest that you're keen on progressing? And are there any particular interest on certain local projects?
So this collaboration is getting more interested in issues around urbanisation and health. So they're working a lot on issues like whether urban living is beneficial for health. So it seems to be, there seems to have been a historic urban advantage in a lot of places that now seems to be disappearing. So the group is particularly interested in that. In terms of local projects, there's not really much for this collaboration that's UK specific, for example. But there are lots of collaborations out there who are interested in all sorts of issues. Essex, for example, very interested in coastal health. So doing a lot of work on health in coastal communities in not just Essex, but also Kent. I think they're going up to basically along the coast from Great Yarmouth down to Dover. So there are collaborations out there. It may take a bit of searching to find them, and maybe if you know an academic, they will be able to tell you who is likely to be the best person to contact.
Great, thank you. And then another question is around the software that's being used. I think you said Bayesian modelling, and I think there was an offer in there around training around that. So yeah, it would be great to hear more about that.
Yes, so for manipulating the data, it's still a lot of Excel spreadsheets. That bit I wasn't involved in, but that's in terms of the knowledge required, that's fairly basic. In terms of the modelling, we used R. Now, R isn't really designed, well, it's not at all designed specifically for Bayesian inference. You can program it yourself in R, and the code with the algorithm is given on the collaboration website, so you can potentially manipulate or sort of modify that code for your own use. The software that's now most commonly used for Bayesian modeling, there's Stan, which is its own language, and there's also Python as well. So PyMC can be used for Bayesian analysis. So the council I said that I was working with, they use Stan, so I've been able to talk to them about both Bayesian modeling in general, but also implementation. So that's the type of training that could be provided. And again, universities are very flexible, so I'm happy to give sort of, let's say, something like this as an overview of Bayesian stats for free. If people want more in-depth training, then there could be a negotiation there.
Great. Well, I'll snap your hand off, James, to do another session like this. And offer that to the community. That would be great. And then we can get a feel for people whether they want more in-depth kind of knowledge or not. The next question I think you've already answered is around, are the code or algorithms shared? And I think you just said they're on the website, so they are freely available. So maybe we'll just make that link available in the chat. And then the next question is about, how do you statistically handle possible variations across different populations when combining data from different sources?
The key, we think, to keeping the estimates of high quality is to make sure that the data are comparable. So, for example, for the height and weight data we use, it should all be height and weight measured in the same way, whatever device you use. So those should be comparable. But then when you get to blood pressure, for example, we have requirements on the study design that has to use particular equipment types. So there's a long checklist that I'm not really involved with that is checked to make sure this is the data are comparable. But then in the models, we also allow the model was designed to pick up these types of variations. So even if data are collected using the same methodology, there will in different samples be different values. So the model is designed to pick those up. So it's a mixture of being careful with the data and careful with the data, but also allowing for this in the model. And the answer on the slide is, yeah, I'm very happy to share the slides. And let me just dig out while we're here. Let me find the code. It is a bit buried. So, for example, so don't click on this unless you want the code, because it will give you a zip file with it in. But yeah, there's code there. Oops. So in terms of the representativeness, what we do is we only include data in the database. Ideally, we want nationally representative data. So we want data that is genuinely nationally representative. But we do also include data that's only from, let's say, urban populations or rural populations, or that's representative but at subnational levels. So let's say, I don't know, it might come from one part of the US, let's say the Northeast. What we don't do is we don't include data that isn't representative. So we don't include data sets. One key issue is that we don't include data from particular population groups. We don't include data that's only from particular occupations, for example. So again, this data quality check-in, that we make sure that it's as representative as possible.
Great. I think we've covered all the questions that have been submitted so far. Don't know if anybody's got anything else or any closing remarks. Anybody wants to put their hand up, feel free. No, that might be it. As I say, we've covered everything in the chat. Thank you so much, James. That was really interesting. And as I say, we'll probably do a further session, as you said, on an overview of Bayesian modelling. That would be super.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
people watch the space for that. Thank you everyone for joining. The recording will be available and the slide deck as well. And thanks again to James for your time and presenting today.
Great, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks. Bye.